The quiet before the storm. The small restaurant sat tucked away on a narrow street where the evening was both serene and fragile. Soft light spilled through frosted windows, bathing worn wooden floors and table settings in a gentle, almost meditative glow. Inside, the atmosphere was one of quiet anticipation, a stark contrast to the inner turmoil that many of its workers kept hidden. A faint hum of machinery from the kitchen blended with the delicate clink of cutlery and the low murmur of reserved conversations. But it was at table 4 that the true story of the night had already begun its slow, deliberate unfolding. Emma, a young waitress with kind eyes and a quiet determination, moved about the restaurant with a grace that belied her exhaustion. Today, like many days before it, had left her drained, both physically and emotionally, as she had labored ceaselessly to serve those who came seeking solace in simple food and quiet company. Her stomach reminded her with every silent groan that she had not had a proper meal. Yet she persisted, clinging to the thought of her unborn child and the future she would help create. Each step that she took seemed laced with the weight of responsibility, each gentle movement a silent pledge to keep going despite the odds. Unknown to most of the patrons who favored the restaurant for its unpretentious charm and the genuine kindness of its staff, the restaurant carried a secret legacy. Its owner, Keanu Reeves, was once the celebrated hero of countless heroic tales and heartwarming narratives. Now he lived a quieter life, seeking solace in a place away from the relentless glare of public attention. His story, like those of the many souls who found refuge within the restaurant's battered walls, was a mosaic of struggle, redemption, and ultimately, surprising acts of bravery. Keanu had long since turned away from the high-octane demands of his previous life. He had embraced the simple, almost meditative rhythm of working in a place that not only fed the hungry but also nourished lost hearts. Tonight, however, the usual order of things was destined to unravel. As the clock in the corner ticked away relentlessly, an aura of restlessness began to seep into the restaurant's calm. A sudden movement at the door, quiet yet resolute, caught the attention of both staff and guests alike. Keanu Reeves, known for his soft-spoken nature and the enigmatic kindness that surrounded him, had arrived, though under circumstances that none could have predicted. He moved with an unmistakable purpose, a curious blend of hope and resignation in his eyes, as if he carried with him the burden of a decision that had shaken him to his core. No one in the dim interior could foresee that within moments the night would transform from a quiet routine into an event so extraordinary that it would echo in the hearts of many for years to come. Keanu's arrival stirred something in each person present, a reminder that even the most gentle souls can harbor storms of their own, and that behind every closed door there lay a story waiting to be told. Keanu made his way slowly towards the counter, pausing only when his gaze met Emma's. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or a premonition of what was to unfold. The air grew heavier, and an undercurrent of emotion hinted at unspoken words. While Emma tried to steady her trembling hands, she could not shake the feeling that tonight was not about the usual grind of work, but something infinitely larger in scope. The restaurant, with all its worn elegance, was about to host a moment that would forever change one life. As Keanu stepped up to the counter, a silence fell, almost reverential, around the small hub of activity. He spoke in a tone so soft that it seemed to blend with the ambient whispers of the air conditioner. Yet every word resonated with the power of someone who had witnessed life's most challenging battles and emerged with a quiet resilience. In that brief moment, Keanu's eyes, usually hidden behind an aura of mystery, shone with an intensity that spoke of both pain and hope. He began to recount the reason for his unexpected presence, a story that began long before tonight and spanned experiences of loss, isolation, and the slow healing that follows after the darkest of storms. It turned out that Keanu had found himself in an unusual predicament, a situation that left him both perplexed and deeply moved. His longtime friend, a gentle soul who had passionately devoted his life to animal welfare, had called him in a state of utter distress. The friend's charitable restaurant, a modest establishment dedicated not only to serving quality food, but also to caring for stray dogs and injured animals, had been overrun by a series of misunderstandings and unfortunate events. Accusations had circulated, rumors had spread like wildfire on social media, and before Keanu knew it, he was entangled in a bitter dispute with the very people he had trusted. The owner of the animal shelter and restaurant had decided, in a moment of harsh judgment and influenced by a mix of desperation and fear, that Keanu could no longer be associated with the restaurant, a place that had once been an emblem of hope and unity. The decision had come without warning, and its impact was profound. Keanu, whose heart beat with an unwavering compassion for all living beings, was struck by an irony that still left him breathless. He had been a beacon of strength in times of turmoil, his actions often transforming moments of despair into opportunities for redemption. So when he found himself in an almost surreal twist of fate, being forced to leave the establishment he had helped build, it was as if the very spirit of the place was crying out for change. Emma, who had witnessed the entire scene with a mixture of shock and sympathy, could feel the weight of Keanu's words. As he recounted memories of sunny afternoons spent laughing with colleagues, of heart-wrenching nights when he had comforted those who had lost everything, and of moments when a simple act of kindness had sparked a flame of hope, the restaurant seemed to exhale a collective sigh of sorrow for what had been lost. Yet within that same sorrow was the seed of something far greater, a promise of new beginnings and the power of resilience in the face of adversity. The conversation slowly unfolded like a tender ballad, each word resonating with a truth that could only be born from lived experience. Keanu described how the once thriving restaurant had been a sanctuary for not just people, but for animals as well, a place where the laughter of rescued dogs mingled with the gentle clatter of crockery, and where every challenge was met with the determination to overcome. The narrative was interwoven with memories of late-night rescues, of the joy found in shared silence, and the ultimate realization that sometimes one must lose something precious to discover a power within that was previously hidden. Meanwhile, as Keanu's words drifted through the hushed room, the patrons became inadvertent witnesses to a cascade of emotions. Some sat with eyes closed as if to embrace the solace of Keanu's gentle sincerity. Others, though trying to appear unaffected, felt a stirring of their own inner voices, reminding them of times when they too had faced moments of profound loss, yet found the strength to rise again. For Emma, Keanu's arrival was a beacon of hope. In his bittersweet recounting of a painful past, she could see the transformative nature of human compassion, a living testimony that even when one door shuts, another opens, often in the most unexpected ways. The night deepened, and as soft music began to play from a small radio perched on a shelf, Keanu's tale reached a poignant climax. He paused, his gaze wandering over the room, as if silently asking each listener to confront their own struggles and acknowledge the strength that resided within. In that charged silence, Emma felt her tired heart awaken. A spark of inspiration took root where despair had long lingered. She remembered the words of her own mother, words that had reminded her that life's hardest battles often heralded the dawn of a new understanding. Then, in an instant that seemed to stretch into eternity, the unexpected happened. A gentle smile appeared on Keanu's face, one that conveyed both resignation and fierce determination. He confessed that while he had been forced out from the restaurant's inner circle, the experience had led him to discover a much deeper connection with the people and animals he cared for. He had begun to see that sometimes life's hardships were not punishments but opportunities to redirect our energies towards something more meaningful. This revelation, shared in a hushed tone that vibrated with authenticity, left everyone in the restaurant spellbound. Emma, hardly able to contain the emotions coursing through her, approached the counter. Her soft-spoken voice, barely a whisper at first, grew with resolve as she expressed her admiration for Keanu's ability to transform personal tragedy into a narrative of hope. She reminded him that the restaurant, despite the conflict that had marred its recent memory, was still very much alive in the hearts of those who believed in its promise of kindness and unity. Her words, simple as they were sincere, stirred something within Keanu. It was as if she had offered him permission to reclaim not just his dignity, but also the vibrant spirit of the place they both cherished. The air in the restaurant shifted palpably. The drama of the evening had transcended individual grievances, blossoming into a communal recognition of shared humanity. Patrons, who had until that moment been silent witnesses to Keanu's sorrow and strength, now found themselves drawn into a collective heartbeat of resilience. One could sense that this was a turning point, a moment that would alter the course of many lives, binding them together with a renewed sense of purpose and compassion. As the clock moved steadily forward, Keanu's voice softened once more, and he began to outline what would come next. He spoke of rebuilding and finding solace in the unlikely places where hope resides. He mentioned dreams of a future where the restaurant would once again stand as a symbol of unity and love, a place where every dish served was a testament to the struggles overcome, and every rescued animal a reminder of the beauty of second chances. For Emma, Keanu's words were not merely inspirational, they were a rallying call. She envisioned a day when the restaurant would once again ring with laughter and heartfelt conversation. A day when every person and animal that crossed its threshold would be welcomed with open arms and a listening heart. In that moment of shared vision, the pain of the past began to loosen its grip, making room for the promise of a brighter, more inclusive future. Keanu's presence that evening was a gentle reminder that even when life's currents force us into unexpected directions, the human spirit remains indomitable. His journey, marked by moments of solitude, misunderstanding, and bitter loss, had now taken on an unexpected turn towards healing. The story he wove in that quiet restaurant was not merely a personal lament or a tale of conflict. It was a universal narrative of struggle and rejuvenation, a living testament to the idea that sometimes being forced away from what we hold dear can propel us into a new chapter of our lives, richer and more profound than ever before. As the night drew to a close, the restaurant's patrons gradually began to depart, each carrying with them the seeds of reflection planted by Keanu's heartfelt confession. Emma, standing behind the counter with tears glistening in her gentle eyes, felt a burgeoning sense of purpose welling up inside her. This was not an ending but the prologue to a transformative journey, a journey fueled by resilience, kindness, and the unwavering belief that even in the darkest hours, light can be found if only one dares to look for it. In the lingering quiet after the last customer had left, Emma lingered at her post, absorbing every word that had been spoken. She began to imagine the future. A reborn restaurant where stories of hope mingled freely with the aroma of freshly prepared meals, and where the human and animal worlds coexisted in mutual care and respect. Keanu, a man who had once lived in the harsh glare of the spotlight, now stood as a quiet guardian of that transformative light. His experience of being forced out of his own legacy was no longer a symbol of defeat, but rather the first step in an extraordinary new beginning. The soft night embraced the restaurant as Emma finally allowed herself to smile. She knew that challenges remained, but within the honest exchange of vulnerability and strength that evening, she had glimpsed the extraordinary power of compassion. The story of Keanu Reeves, his unforeseen banishment, and the stirring hope it ignited was far from over. It was just the beginning of an epic narrative that would carry forward into tomorrow and beyond, leaving everyone who experienced it forever changed. As the final notes of the quiet background music faded away, Emma resolved that she, too, would contribute to the legacy that the restaurant now symbolized. Tonight had shown her that every setback holds the potential for a breakthrough, that every act of kindness plants a seed of possibility. And in the soft glow of that empty dining room, where every scrap of memory lingered like a gentle promise, the world seemed to whisper that hope, like the steady beat of a resilient heart, would always find a way to emerge from the shadows. The ripple of one decision. The next morning arrived slowly, like a soft breath over the quiet streets. Sunlight crawled across the cracked sidewalks and the weary bricks of the old restaurant, painting shadows that stretched across the wooden sign above the door. The place, once alive with laughter and footsteps, now seemed to hold its breath. Only the wind whispered its presence. brushing gently against the windows that had once welcomed strangers and friends alike. Inside, the air felt different. Not heavy like the night before, but expectant. It was the kind of silence that came before something important, something meaningful. Emma stood at the counter, staring out at the empty tables. She had arrived earlier than usual. She couldn't sleep the night before, her thoughts filled with what she had heard from Keanu. His voice still echoed in her memory. Not the words alone, but the feeling behind them. The pain he carried, the peace he tried to find, and the hope he left behind when he walked away into the night. She ran her hand along the edge of the table, remembering the people who had sat there, the stories shared over simple meals, the quiet tears wiped away with napkins. This wasn't just a restaurant. It had never been just a restaurant. It was a place where broken hearts could breathe, where forgotten souls were seen, and where kindness served as currency. Emma felt a growing pull in her chest, a kind of ache that wasn't pain, but something close, a longing, a calling. She didn't know exactly what it meant yet, but she knew this. Something had to change. Not just for Keanu. For everyone. A few blocks away, Keanu Reeves sat in a small park on a worn wooden bench, a cup of lukewarm coffee in his hand. The world moved around him. People rushing to work, dogs barking at birds, kids laughing in the distance. Life was happening all around him, but inside, he felt paused. Not frozen, just between things. He had been up all night, walking through streets that felt familiar but distant. The city was changing. People were changing. And somewhere along the way, he had started to feel like a stranger in a place he had once built with his own hands. The restaurant had been a dream. Not a flashy one. Not a famous one. Just a quiet dream of building a space where good food and better hearts could meet. He had poured his soul into it. The late nights cleaning dishes when the staff had gone home. The mornings spent preparing fresh bread. And the countless moments sitting across from someone in pain, listening, offering not advice, but presence. He didn't need recognition. He didn't need cameras. He just needed to be of use. That was his peace. But now, after being told to leave, to step away from the very place that had been his sanctuary, he felt like a guest in his own life. The decision to remove him had not been made with cruelty, but fear. The new board members who had recently taken control of the restaurant's operations were focused on expansion, more locations, faster service, less emotional distractions. They believed Keanu's quiet, empathetic ways were slowing down progress. "He's too involved," one had said. "We need to treat this like a business," another had added. And just like that, Keanu was out. No warning, no conversation, just a letter. A letter from people who had never seen the way his eyes softened when a stray dog wandered in, how he would drop everything to help a struggling mother pay for her meal, or how he spent Christmas morning cooking for people who had nowhere else to go. Emma had seen it. Others had too. But in the rush for profit, some stories get erased. Keanu stared into his coffee, the liquid still, like a mirror. He didn't blame them. Not fully. But he was done waiting for permission to do what he knew was right. Back at the restaurant, Emma had made a decision. She stepped outside into the morning sun and pulled out her phone. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to do. She opened the camera, turned it toward herself, and hit record. "Hi," she said softly. "My name is Emma. I work at a small restaurant in the city. The one with the blue door and the rescue dogs out back." She paused, then continued, her voice steadier. "Last night, I had a conversation with someone who means a lot to many of us. You probably know his name, Keanu Reeves. He's not just a movie star. He's the heart of this place. Or he was." She looked down for a moment, gathering her thoughts. He was told to leave. He was told that his kindness was slowing things down. That being human was a problem. Emma looked directly into the camera now, her eyes filled with quiet fire. "I don't believe that. I don't think any of us do. So I'm asking for your help. If this place ever mattered to you, if you ever believed in second chances, in quiet heroes, in doing the right thing even when it's hard, please share this. Let them know that people like Keanu are the reason places like this matter. She ended the video and posted it with the caption, "Bring him back." Within minutes, the post began to spread. Within hours, it had gone viral. People from all over the world began to share their stories, moments when they had been touched by Keanu's kindness, whether in person or from afar. A woman in Canada shared how he had once paid for her grandmother's surgery in secret. A man in Tokyo recalled the time he had seen Keanu helping stray animals after a flood. Messages poured in, all with the same thread. "He made my life better." Hashtags began to trend. Hashtag bring Keanu back. Hashtag keep the heart. Hashtag kindness matters. Journalists picked up the story. Influencers reposted Emma's video. People who had never stepped foot in the restaurant began donating to keep it alive. Not to expand, but to protect what made it sacred. The board of the restaurant, seeing the overwhelming response, called an emergency meeting. Numbers don't lie, and the message was clear. People didn't want a brand. They'd wanted a beating heart. They wanted Keanu back. But by the time they reached out, Keanu was already doing something else. He didn't wait for an apology. He didn't wait for the board to change their minds. Instead, he did what he had always done. He looked around for the broken, the lost, the forgotten, and he got to work. With the help of a few close friends and some quiet donors, Keanu rented an old building on the edge of the city, a place long abandoned, with cracked tiles and peeling paint. Most people saw it a ruin. Keanu saw potential. He rolled up his sleeves and began cleaning, not just the dust and dirt, but the energy, the sadness that had settled into the walls. He painted, he repaired, he built shelves and tables and dog beds. And slowly, word got out. He's building something new. He's doing it without them. He's doing it with us. Emma was the first to show up. She didn't say a word. She just grabbed a broom and started sweeping. One by one, others followed. Old staff, old guests, new friends. It wasn't just a restaurant being built. It was a movement. They called it the Blue Table. No logos, no rules, no dress codes. Just one long blue table in the center where everyone sat together. No reservations, no bill. You paid what you could. If you couldn't pay, you helped. Served someone, cleaned a dish, told a story. Stray animals had a home in the back. Dogs, cats, even a blind raccoon named Lucky. Music played softly. And Keanu, he didn't own it. He didn't manage it. He just showed up, every day, helping, listening, laughing. He was the janitor, the dishwasher, the storyteller. And slowly, word of this place spread not because of marketing, but because of magic. The kind of magic that comes from doing something real, something pure. One evening, as the sun set behind the old building, turning the sky gold and pink, Emma stood outside watching families, strangers, old friends, and rescued animals gather at the Blue Table. She turned to Keanu, who was fixing a wobbly chair with a half-smile on his face. "Do you ever miss the old place?" she asked. Keanu looked up, his eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes," he said, "but this feels right." Emma nodded. And in that moment, under the soft glow of string lights and the gentle hum of conversation and wagging tails, they both knew. What had started as a heartbreak had become a home. The story of Keanu being kicked out of his own restaurant had become more than a headline. It had become a symbol. A reminder that being pushed out doesn't mean being pushed down. That when the world tells you you're too kind, too gentle, too human, you build something better. Something stronger. Something that no board can control. A place where everyone has a seat at the Blue Table. And that's where the legend really began. The man who ate in silence. Mornings at the Blue Table didn't begin with alarms. They began with the sound of soft footsteps, warm laughter, and the gentle clinking of pans being placed on the stove. There were no opening hours, no closed signs, and no sharp lines dividing us from them. It was all one big circle. Keanu always arrived before sunrise. He didn't drive there in a fancy car. He didn't walk in wearing sunglasses or hiding behind bodyguards. He simply arrived, hoodie pulled low, hands stuffed in his pockets, sometimes carrying a bag of dog treats or leftover bread for the birds. This morning, like many before it, he unlocked the door quietly and entered the space with a kind of respect, like someone stepping into a sacred place. The blue table stretched across the center of the room, long enough to seat 20, but wide enough to make everyone feel close. The walls were painted by local kids, full of bright flowers, stars, quotes, and smiling animals. The ceiling had lanterns made from recycled glass, each one glowing softly when lit. The kitchen was open, not just the design, but the spirit. Anyone could cook if they asked. No one judged your skills. A burnt pancake still got applause. Keanu placed his jacket on a hook near the door, rolled up his sleeves, and began chopping onions. He didn't speak much in the mornings, not because he was tired, but because silence was part of his ritual. It gave him space to think. And today, his thoughts were busy. It had been 2 months since the video went viral. 2 months since he walked away from the restaurant he helped build and began building something far more meaningful. And even now, every single day felt like a gift. But that morning, someone arrived who would change the course of everything. Emma walked in just after sunrise, her coat too big and her eyes a little red. She was due in 2 weeks, the baby growing heavier with each passing day. Still, she never missed a morning. Even when her feet swelled and her back ached, she showed up. "I made banana bread," she said with a tired smile, holding a container. "Smells amazing," Keanu replied, wiping his hands. Emma placed it on the counter, then looked around. "We're expecting guests." Keanu nodded toward the door. Someone new came yesterday. Didn't speak much. Just sat in the corner and stared at the table. Did he eat? Only a little. "Do you think he'll come back?" Keanu gave a gentle shrug. People always come back when they feel seen. His name was Elliot. No one knew that yet because he hadn't told anyone. Not a word. He had walked in the day before wearing a faded green jacket and shoes that looked 2 sizes too big. He was maybe in his late 50s, with a face like a forgotten novel. Worn, full of stories, and marked by time. He sat at the far end of the blue table, close to the wall, where the light was dim. He hadn't asked for food. Someone had simply placed a bowl of soup in front of him, and he had nodded once. Today, he returned. Again, in silence. He sat in the same seat, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes distant. Emma noticed him first. She walked over slowly, placing a plate of banana bread and a cup of warm tea in front of him. Then she sat down across from him without a word, just being there. A minute passed. Then 2. Finally, his eyes lifted, just slightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice dry. "You're welcome," Emma replied, smiling softly. Another long silence. Then a question. "Do you own this place?" Emma chuckled. "No, but the guy washing dishes does." Elliot looked confused. Emma nodded toward the back. "That's Keanu." The older man followed her gaze, eyes landing on Keanu's familiar face. "The actor." "The person," Emma corrected gently. "The actor part is just his side job." Elliot stared at Keanu for a long moment, then looked back down at his tea. He didn't speak again. Not that day. Over the next week, Elliot returned every morning. He never asked for food. Never took more than he needed. Never asked questions. But he began to notice things. A boy named Lucas came every Tuesday with his service dog, Hazel. Lucas didn't speak much either, but he painted pictures on scraps of cardboard and gave them away to strangers. He gave one to Elliot. It was a drawing of a tree with deep roots and tiny birds sitting on the branches. "That's you," Lucas had said shyly. "The birds are your memories. You just forgot how to sing." Then there was Mrs. Carter, who made soup every Friday from scratch using ingredients people brought from home. She would hum old jazz songs while stirring the pot, and she always saved a second bowl for Elliot. Keanu never forced conversation. He simply greeted Elliot each morning with a quiet nod, sometimes handing him a warm cloth, sometimes just sharing a glance that said, "You matter." And slowly, something began to change. On the 9th morning, Elliot walked in and sat down with a small paper bag in his hand. He placed it on the table in front of Keanu. "For you," he said. Keanu opened it gently. Inside was an old, worn book of poetry. "I used to write," Elliot explained, eyes on the floor, "before I lost everything." Keanu didn't say anything. He simply placed a hand on the book and nodded. "Would you like to read one?" he asked. Elliot hesitated, then opened the book. His voice trembled at first, but as he read, the room grew still. The poem was about a man who had once built a boat from broken wood. The world laughed, saying it would never float, but he sailed anyway. And even when the water filled the cracks, he kept rowing. Not because he thought he would reach shore, but because the rowing made him feel alive. When Elliot finished, the room remained silent. Then Lucas clapped once, then twice. Soon the room was filled with quiet applause, not for a performance, but for a soul rediscovered. Elliot closed the book, tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. Keanu leaned forward. "We're all just boats, you know," he said gently. "Patched up, cracked, but still floating." News of the Blue Table continued to spread, but not because of marketing. Because of people like Elliot, Lucas, Emma, and Keanu, and the invisible threads of kindness that connected them all. Celebrities started visiting quietly, not for photos, for peace. One day, a famous singer arrived, stayed for 3 hours, and left a note that read, "I haven't felt this human in years." Another day, a billionaire left a donation without giving a name. Just a message, "Keep feeding the hearts." And through it all, Keanu never stepped into the spotlight. He stayed in the kitchen, in the corner, with the mop, with the dishes. He knew where real power lived, not in fame, but in presence. Emma's baby was born 2 weeks later, in a small room behind the Blue Table, with a midwife who volunteered and a dozen people waiting outside, singing lullabies and offering tea. When she held her daughter for the first time, she cried not just from joy, but from disbelief. That a girl with no home, no support, and no hope had found a family in a restaurant with no prices and no rules. She named her daughter Grace, and as she rocked her in her arms, she whispered, "You were born in the safest place on earth." Elliot began leading poetry nights. Lucas painted a mural on the front wall, a boat with wings. Mrs. Carter opened a soup cart across the street, giving free meals to bus drivers and nurses. And Keanu, he kept sweeping, kept chopping, kept listening. And if you asked him why he did it, why he gave so much when he had nothing to prove, he would only smile and say, "Because someone has to remember what it means to care." The Blue Table wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a shelter, a school, a stage, a family, and everyone who sat there knew one thing. This place wasn't built by money or fame. It was built by kindness, by the man who got kicked out of his own restaurant and found something far more powerful in return. The night of the broken violin. The rain came down softly at first, like a whisper. It touched the windows of the Blue Table in gentle taps, each drop like a question from the sky. Inside, the warm yellow lights flickered, casting slow-moving shadows on the brick walls. The smell of garlic and roasted vegetables filled the room. Someone had brought fresh herbs that morning, and their earthy scent still lingered in the air. Emma sat near the end of the long table, her baby, little Grace, tucked against her chest, wrapped in a soft wool blanket. The baby was quiet, peaceful, one tiny hand curled around Emma's shirt. Even in sleep, Grace seemed to breathe in rhythm, with the gentle hum of conversation and clinking cups. Lucas was sketching again, this time on a napkin. His dog, Hazel, rested her head on his feet. Elliot was reading from a new poem he had written about a winter that didn't come, a metaphor for healing that took longer than expected. Keanu stood by the counter, drying plates with a quiet rhythm. His movements were steady, calm, as if he were part of the very heartbeat of the place. It had been 3 months since the Blue Table opened. And in that time, people from every walk of life had found their way to its doors, not because they were hungry, but because they were searching for something the outside world had forgotten how to give. Safety, silence, connection. But that night, someone came who wasn't searching for safety. Someone came running from something much darker. She arrived just after sunset, soaked from the rain, barefoot, clutching something under her coat. Her eyes were wide, too wide, the kind of wide that comes from being chased for too long by memories that won't die. Her name was Mia. No one knew that yet. She didn't speak, just stood in the doorway, dripping onto the floor, staring at everyone like she had stepped into a dream that couldn't be real. Emma was the first to notice. She stood up, gently handed Grace to Mrs. Carter, and walked slowly toward the girl. "Hey," Emma said softly, holding out a clean towel. No answer, just trembling. Then a whisper. "Is this the place?" Emma tilted her head. "What place?" "The place where they don't ask questions." Emma smiled. "That's the one." They gave her warm soup and dry clothes. Lena, the old chef, found an extra pair of socks and a hoodie. Lucas offered her a small drawing, a blue star surrounded by hearts. She took it with shaking hands, stared at it like it was the first thing anyone had ever given her without asking for something in return. Still, she didn't speak much. For days, she sat in the corner silent. She would eat quietly, help with dishes, then vanish into the small storage room in the back where she slept. No one pushed her, not even Keanu. He simply nodded to her every morning, passed her a slice of bread or a warm tea, and went back to his work. But one night, something broke. It was raining again. Keanu was mopping the floor. Emma was rocking Grace to sleep. The room had gone quiet, only a soft guitar playing from an old speaker in the corner. Then a loud crash. Metal. Glass. Everyone turned toward the back room. They found Mia on the floor, sobbing. The door was open, and beside her lay the broken pieces of a violin. Keanu knelt beside her. He didn't ask what happened. He just placed his hand gently on the violin, lifting one half carefully. "It was yours?" he asked. Mia nodded. Then the words tumbled out, fast, broken, messy. "My mom's," she said through tears. "Last thing she gave me. We used to play together. I haven't played in a year. I tried tonight, but my hands, they shook, and I dropped it. It's all I had left." No one spoke, just silence. Then Keanu, in his usual soft way, said, "You still have the music." Mia looked at him like he had just spoken in another language. "But the violin is gone." Keanu picked up a piece and held it to the light. "Maybe, or maybe it's waiting for someone to put it back together." The next morning, Mia woke to find something waiting at her place at the table. Not a new violin, not money, not a gift card or a grand gesture, just the broken violin, carefully glued back together. And a note, in simple handwriting. Sometimes the cracks are part of the story. She turned the violin over in her hands. It wasn't perfect. The strings were old. One peg was missing. But it was whole. She brought it to her shoulder, closed her eyes, and played. The first note was shaky. The second, stronger. By the fifth, the room was silent. And when she opened her eyes, tears streamed down faces young and old. Lucas clapped slowly. Elliot wiped his glasses. Emma held Grace to her heart and smiled. And Keanu? He just stood in the corner, arms crossed, eyes filled with something deeper than pride. Something like hope. From that day on, Mia played every Friday night. They called it Fractured Friday, not because things were broken, but because healing sometimes starts with the broken parts. People came from all over to hear her. A retired soldier who hadn't slept in weeks said it was the first time he dreamed in color. A child with autism who had never spoken whispered, "Pretty music." A man who had been planning to end his life changed his mind after hearing her play. "It made me feel like I still mattered," he later wrote in a note. Mia never became famous, but she became free. Months passed. The Blue Table became more than a restaurant. It became a haven, a stage, a chapel, a home. Reporters tried to cover it, but the story was too real, too human for headlines. What would they say? Man gives away food. Kindness still exists. Those stories don't go viral, but they go deep. And in the hearts of everyone who passed through, the story of the girl with the broken violin and the man who fixed it became a legend. Keanu never spoke much about it. If you asked him why he did it, he'd just smile and say, "Because everyone deserves to feel whole again, even if only for a song." And so the music continued. The laughter grew. The table stretched longer as more chairs were added, and as the seasons changed, so did the people. Some left, some returned, but all carried a piece of the Blue Table with them, a piece of something unspoken, something unbreakable. Because in a world that breaks people quietly, sometimes the softest places are the strongest. And sometimes a broken violin can sing the loudest song of all. The man in the leather jacket. It was a cold afternoon when he arrived. Not the kind of cold that freezes your skin, but the kind that seeps into your bones and lingers, the kind of cold that reminds you of things you'd rather forget. Keanu was in the back, loading boxes of donated bread into the pantry. Lucas was painting a new mural with Hazel sitting loyally beside him. Emma had just finished feeding baby Grace and was gently rocking her near the warm kitchen. Then the front door creaked open. Wind swept through the room like a whisper. A man stepped in. Tall, thin, eyes sharp. Black leather jacket, dark jeans, worn boots. His hands were calloused, his knuckles scarred. He looked like someone who had fought one too many battles and stopped keeping score. He scanned the room like he didn't belong, like he didn't expect to be welcomed. Keanu walked out from the back and froze. For a full second, time didn't move. Then he spoke. "Mark." The man in the leather jacket tilted his head. "Hey, Keanu." Silence fell across the room. Not a single dish clinked. Not a single voice whispered. Because even though no one knew who he was, they felt something shift. Mark Reeves, Keanu's younger brother, or at least, he used to be. They hadn't spoken in over 20 years. Not since the night that changed everything. Not since the screaming match in the hospital hallway. Not since the fire. Keanu never told the full story. And no one had ever asked. Mark looked older than his age. Not from years, but from choices. He carried the weight of regret in his shoulders and the bitterness of lost time in his jawline. "I heard about this place," Mark said quietly. "Thought it might be a good time to say hi." Keanu didn't smile. He didn't frown either. Just looked at him like a memory walking in from the rain. Emma stood slowly, her instincts protective. Grace stirred in her arms. Keanu noticed and gave a gentle wave with his fingers. "It's all right," he said. "This is family." Emma didn't move, but she softened slightly. Mark walked slowly toward the Blue Table. He didn't sit, just ran his fingers across the edge. "Nice place," he muttered. "It's not mine," Keanu said. "It belongs to everyone." Mark laughed once. Dry, short, still with the deep lines. Keanu didn't reply. He just pulled out a chair and sat down. Then, quietly, "Why are you here?" The story came out in pieces, like ashes floating through air. Mark had been struggling for years. Addiction, anger, arrests. He blamed Keanu for not being there. Keanu blamed himself for being too late. When their sister passed, grief tore them apart. Words were said that couldn't be taken back. They hadn't spoken since. But then, Mark had seen the video. The one Emma posted. He'd watched it 20 times in silence. And something inside him, something he thought was dead, stirred. Not guilt, not jealousy, something closer to ache. So he got on a bus, traveled across the country. No luggage, just a broken heart and a name. "I don't want anything," Mark said. "I'm not here to take. I just wanted to see if you were still real." Keanu's eyes didn't water, but something behind them did. He leaned forward and said the words Mark had waited 20 years to hear. "I'm still your brother." Mark stayed, not as a guest, but as a worker. He started by sweeping the front step. Then he took out the trash. Then he helped Lena chop vegetables. Badly, but with effort. He didn't talk much, but he showed up. Every day. And slowly, the others started to accept him. Emma offered him coffee. Lucas gave him a painting of 2 trees growing side by side. Even Hazel let him scratch behind her ears. And Keanu. He didn't say much either. But he watched. And waited. Then one night, Mark snapped. It was small. Someone had dropped a tray of plates. A loud crash. Mark jumped to his feet, fists clenched, eyes wild. Everyone froze. Emma stepped back. Lucas ducked under the table. Keanu stood. Mark breathed heavily. His chest rose and fell like he was in a storm. His lips trembled. And then he ran. Out the door. Into the dark. Keanu followed. No words. Just footsteps in the rain. He found Mark near the alley, sitting on a crate, face in his hands. "I'm not good," Mark said, voice cracking. "I'm trying, but I'm not good." Keanu sat beside him, silent. "I've hurt people," Mark whispered. "I've broken things. I don't belong in a place like that." Keanu looked at him. "Neither do I." Mark looked up, confused. Keanu sighed. "I've made mistakes too. I've walked away when I should have stayed. I've let silence win. I built the blue table because I was trying to forgive myself." Mark stared at him for a long time. "So, this place, it's not just about others." Keanu shook his head. "It's about all of us. It's about healing. Together." They sat in the rain for a long time, not fixing anything, not pretending it was okay. Just sitting. And somehow, that was enough. The next morning, Mark walked in through the front door with a mop and bucket. Emma nodded. Lucas handed him a painting of a broken cup filled with stars. And Keanu. He handed him an apron. Mark put it on. And smiled. Weeks passed. The story spread quietly. Keanu and Mark were seen cooking together, laughing together, crying once when someone sang their sister's favorite song. The blue table didn't just feed people. It healed families, reunited hearts, forgave sins. One evening, Mark stood at the table and spoke. His voice was quiet, but every soul listened. "I used to think people like me didn't deserve second chances, but now I know. Second chances aren't given. They're built, one act of kindness at a time." He looked at Keanu. "Thank you for building this place." Keanu smiled. "Thank you for showing up." That night, they added one more chair to the blue table. Not for a guest, not for a stranger, for a brother. And as the lights flickered gently above, and the rain tapped gently on the windows again, the world outside kept spinning. But inside the blue table, time stood still. Forgiveness had found its place. The flood, It started with a light drizzle in the morning. Just a soft, steady rain that made the bricks outside the blue table glisten. People passing by pulled their jackets tighter, their umbrellas bobbing as they hurried along. Inside, the warmth was the same as always. Emma sat at the long table with Grace in her lap, feeding her mashed banana. Mark was helping Lena chop vegetables, his movements slower but steadier these days. Lucas was painting yet another masterpiece on the wall. This time a large tree with branches that spread across the ceiling. The smell of baking bread filled the air. Everything felt calm, safe. No one had any idea what was coming. By early afternoon, the drizzle had turned into a downpour. Rivers of water rushed along the streets, splashing against curbs. The small stream behind the blue table, usually just a quiet trickle, began to swell. Its waters darkened, swirling faster with every passing hour. Keanu stood by the window, watching the rain. "We've had storms before," Lena said, wiping her hands on her apron. "This old place always holds up." But Keanu's face was tense. He wasn't just looking at the rain. He was looking at something inside himself. Something he couldn't shake. "I'll check the back," he said. Emma followed him as he stepped outside into the rain. The backyard of the blue table was a small space where stray animals often wandered, looking for food or shelter. The rain had turned the ground into a muddy mess. Water pooled near the back wall, trickling steadily into the basement door. Keanu crouched down, his fingers brushing the rising puddle. It wasn't a flood yet, but it was close. "What do we do?" Emma asked, holding Grace tightly. Keanu looked at her, his face calm, but his eyes serious. "We prepare." By evening, the rain had become a storm. Wind whipped against the windows. Water poured from the skies in thick sheets. People outside struggled with umbrellas that turned inside out. The small stream behind the blue table had overflowed, rushing down the alley and pooling at the back door. The lights inside flickered once. Emma's heart raced. What happens if the power goes out? Keanu was already moving. Everyone upstairs. Now, Emma, Lena, Mark, Lucas, and the handful of others who had been there that night grabbed what they could. Food, blankets, anything important, and hurried to the upper level. It wasn't much more than a small storage area, but it was dry. "What about the animals?" Emma asked. "We'll bring them up," Keanu said. He and Mark ran back down, calling out to the dogs and cats that had wandered in over the months. One by one, they carried them up the stairs, their fur soaked, their eyes wide with fear. Lucas held Hazel close, whispering softly to her. Emma rocked Grace, her arms trembling. The water crept higher. The basement was the first to go. Then the kitchen floor was under inches of water. Soon, the blue table itself, that long, beautiful table, was surrounded by dark, swirling pools. "It's going to be okay," Keanu said, his voice steady. "We just have to wait it out." But even as he said it, his mind was racing. The blue table wasn't just a restaurant. It was a home, a haven, a place where broken things were made whole. And now it was in danger of being swept away. Hours passed. The storm raged on. They could hear the roar of water outside, the crashing of debris against walls, the relentless howl of wind. Emma whispered to Grace, rocking her gently. Lucas leaned against the wall, his sketchbook soaked but still clutched in his hands. Lena hummed a soft tune, trying to calm everyone. Mark sat quietly, staring at his hands. And Keanu kept checking the windows. He kept listening. He kept thinking. Then he stood. "We can't just sit here." Everyone looked at him. "What do you mean?" Mark asked. Keanu pointed outside. "If the water keeps rising, the whole place will be underwater. We have to do something." "But what can we do?" Lena asked. "It's a flood. We can't stop it." Keanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the corner of the room, picked up a long wooden plank, and looked at Mark. "Help me." Mark hesitated, but then he stood. All right. Together, they carried the plank down the stairs and placed it across the rising water. Keanu moved quickly, grabbing whatever he could find. Old boards, crates, pieces of furniture. He built a small barrier at the back door, trying to hold back the water. Emma watched from the top of the stairs, holding her breath. The water pushed against the makeshift wall, spilling through cracks, but it slowed. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it bought them time. Time to think. Time to hope. The storm lasted through the night, but by morning the rain had eased. The wind had died down. Keanu stood in the muddy backyard, his boots sinking into the wet ground. The water had stopped rising. The barrier had held just enough. Emma stepped out beside him, Grace in her arms. "We made it," she said softly. Keanu nodded, but his face was serious. "The table," he said quietly. Emma turned toward the blue table. The room was still standing, but the water had left its mark. The table was waterlogged, the wood warped, chairs were scattered, some broken. The walls were damp, the floor covered in mud. It wasn't the place they remembered, but it was still there. "We'll fix it," Emma said. Keanu looked at her, a faint smile touching his lips. Together, the community came back stronger than ever. Once the storm passed, people began arriving with supplies. Woodworkers offered to rebuild the table. Artists came to repaint the walls. Neighbors brought food and water. Mark took charge of cleaning out the basement. Emma helped organize donations. Lucas painted a new mural of a phoenix rising from the flood. And Keanu. He worked quietly, side by side with everyone. Sanding the table, nailing boards, cleaning floors. Not as a leader, not as a celebrity, just as one of them. Days turned into weeks. The blue table was rebuilt, piece by piece. And when it reopened, it wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a symbol, a reminder that even when the floodwaters come, even when it feels like everything you've built is falling apart, you can stand together. You can rebuild. You can rise again. Keanu sat at the head of the new table that night, surrounded by laughter, the sound of forks on plates, the soft hum of a violin played by Mia. He looked around the room, at Emma, Grace, Lucas, Mark, Lena, and all the others who had come through the storm. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something he thought he had lost. Peace. The legend grows. Weeks turned into months, and the blue table stood stronger than ever. Its walls, once scared by floods, now bore fresh, vibrant murals painted by Lucas and others who came to lend their talents. The long table, lovingly rebuilt from reclaimed wood, shone with a new polish. It wasn't perfect. There were still uneven spots, cracks filled with glue and love. But no one cared. If anything, those imperfections made it more special, a testament to what could rise from ruin. The flood had tested them, but it had also transformed them. And now, the blue table wasn't just a place. It was a story that spread beyond the neighborhood, beyond the city, even beyond the country. People from all over came to see it, not tourists looking for selfies, but seekers. People who had heard whispers of a sanctuary where kindness was served alongside soup, where no one was turned away, and where a quiet man named Keanu Reeves swept floors as if he were cleaning a temple. Some came out of curiosity, others out of desperation. They wanted to know if the rumors were true. Could a place like this really exist? Was it possible for something so pure, so uncommercial, to survive in a world that seemed to value everything else? What they found was not a spectacle. There were no cameras, no flashing lights, just the steady rhythm of people helping people. A woman who had lost her home found herself making coffee for others. A man who had been on the verge of giving up was now teaching kids how to carve wood. A young singer, too scared to perform in public, found her voice during a quiet Sunday evening at the table. Every person who walked through those doors added something, a story, a laugh, a tear, and each time the blue table absorbed it, becoming richer, deeper, more alive. Keanu never sought credit. If anything, he tried to stay in the background. But people noticed. They noticed how he would quietly fix a broken chair, or how he would sit with someone who looked like they were carrying the weight of the world. They noticed how he never rushed, never judged, and always listened. And the legend grew. Emma's baby, Grace, was learning to walk. She would toddle down the length of the table, her tiny hands gripping its edges for balance. Whenever she fell, there were always a dozen arms ready to catch her. She became a symbol of hope for everyone who came. She had been born in the midst of chaos, and yet she was happy, loved, and free. She's going to grow up knowing what real kindness looks like, Emma said one evening, watching Grace play. She'll never have to wonder if good people exist. Keanu smiled at that, though his eyes carried a hint of sadness. She'll be better than us, he said softly. She'll take what we've built and make it something even greater. Mark had found his rhythm. He still struggled at times, but the work gave him purpose. When the memories of his mistakes crept in, he would pick up a hammer or a broom and focus on the task at hand. Over time, the others began to rely on him. If something broke, they went to Mark. If someone needed a shoulder to lean on, Mark was there. He had gone from being the man in the leather jacket who walked in out of the rain to the man who kept the place running smoothly. He was proof that second chances weren't just given. They were earned every single day. And every so often, when no one was looking, Keanu would place a hand on Mark's shoulder, not to say anything, just as a reminder that he was proud. Then came the day that changed everything. It wasn't planned. It wasn't announced. It simply happened. A young filmmaker who had come to the Blue Table weeks earlier returned with a camera. I just want to capture this, he said. Not for fame, not for views, just to show the world that places like this can exist. At first, Keanu hesitated. This isn't about the spotlight, he said. It's just about people being good to each other. Exactly, the filmmaker replied. That's why it matters. After a long pause, Keanu nodded. Just keep it honest. The filmmaker spent days at the Blue Table, filming quietly, blending into the background. He didn't stage anything. He didn't ask people to repeat their words. He simply let the camera roll, capturing the laughter, the music, the tears, and the quiet acts of kindness that filled every corner. When he finished, he edited it into a short film titled The Table That Heals. He posted it online with no fanfare, no sponsors, no monetization, just the story. And within days, it went viral. The film wasn't polished. It wasn't flashy. It was raw, simple, and real. It showed Keanu wiping down the table after a long day. It showed Lucas painting another mural. It showed Emma helping a single father who had walked in with nothing but his son's hand in his. It showed Mia playing her violin while a crowd of strangers sat in peaceful silence, their hearts full. And it showed the Blue Table itself, not as a place, but as a feeling, a reminder that the world could be better if only we chose to care. Comments poured in. This gave me hope. I thought places like this didn't exist anymore. I want to create something like this in my own town. Thank you for reminding me that people can be good. The film wasn't just a story. It was a spark, a call to action. And people answered. In the months that followed, others began to replicate the Blue Table in their own cities. A coffee shop in New York offered pay-what-you-can meals. A bookstore in London opened its doors to the homeless during winter, offering free tea and blankets. A small diner in Tokyo started hosting community nights where everyone cooked together and shared stories. They didn't copy the Blue Table. They didn't need to. They simply took its message, that kindness, community, and humanity were enough, and made it their own. Keanu watched all of this from afar. He never stepped into the spotlight, never claimed credit. He stayed at the Blue Table, sweeping floors, listening to people's stories, and being present. One evening, as the sun set and the room filled with warm light, Emma sat beside him. Did you ever think it would grow like this? she asked. Keanu shook his head. I never planned for any of this, he said. I just wanted a place where people could be kind, where they could heal. I didn't think it would matter to anyone else. Emma smiled. It matters. More than you know. Keanu nodded slowly. Then I guess we keep going. The blue table remained a beacon, not because it was perfect, not because it was famous, but because it never tried to be anything other than what it was. A place where anyone could sit, share, and feel whole again. And as the years passed, the legend of the blue table, and the quiet man who started it, continued to grow. Not in headlines, not in awards, but in the countless lives it touched. The story became timeless, whispered from one heart to another. And somewhere, in a small warm room filled with laughter and the soft notes of a violin, Keanu Reeves sat at the end of the blue table, smiling quietly as the world found its way back to kindness.